The bucket was cracked along the bottom rim, held together by duct tape that had gone gray from dirt and soap residue. Emma Hartley pressed her thumb against the split, testing whether it would last another day. It would. It had to. $5 per car. $30 so far today. 20 more and she could buy groceries that would stretch through Thursday if she was careful. The sun pressed down on the Bolar gas station parking lot like a hot iron. Emma's shirt clung to her back and her sneakers had worn through it, the heel cardboard stuffed inside to keep the sole from flapping. She was 13 years old. She should have been in 8th grade homeroom worrying about algebra tests and whether anyone noticed her at lunch. Instead, she was here watching the highway for cars that might stop, might need washing, might have $5, and enough pity not to ask questions. Her mother didn't know she was here. Her mother didn't know much of anything anymore. Linda Hartley had been a different person 3 years ago. She'd worked at the elementary school cafeteria, kept the apartment clean, made breakfast every morning. She'd smiled. Emma remembered that most clearly, her mother smiling, while flipping pancakes, humming old songs Emma didn't recognize but liked anyway. That was before Lily drowned, before Thomas Hartley packed a duffel bag and left without saying goodbye, before Linda stopped getting out of bed except to use the bathroom and stare at photo albums she kept hidden under her pillow. Emma squeezed the sponge into the bucket, watching brown water swirl against the white plastic. Somewhere behind the gas station, the train yard hummed with low industrial noise. Metal grinding on metal, air brakes hissing, freight cars coupling with dull, heavy clangs that carried for miles when the wind was right. The tracks cut straight through Bolar like a scar, splitting the town between people who had something and people who had nothing. Emma lived on the nothing side. She dragged the bucket toward a blue sedan that had just pulled in. The driver was already pumping gas, staring at his phone like she didn't exist. Emma stopped a respectful distance away and held up her signed cardboard with hand-lettered words, "Car wash, $5. The man glanced at her, looked away, kept scrolling. Emma waited. Sometimes they changed their minds. Sometimes guilt worked slower than indifference. The man finished pumping, got back in his car, and drove away without looking at her again. Emma returned to her milk crate in the shade by the propane tanks and sat down. Her knees ached. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, skin cracked around the knuckles where cheap soap had stripped the moisture away. She flexed her fingers and tried not to think about school, tried not to think about the honor roll certificate she'd hidden under her mattress, the one from 6th grade that said Emma Hartley Academic Excellence. She'd been good at school. She'd loved reading, loved the way stories pulled her out of her own life and dropped her somewhere better. That felt like 100 years ago. The rumble started low, distant, growing louder. Emma looked up. Motorcycles. 8 of them riding in formation, engines synchronized into a single roar that swallowed every other sound. They slowed as they approached the gas station, turning in with the smooth coordination of a military unit. Emma's stomach tightened. She knew what motorcycles like that meant. Everyone in Bolar knew. The bikes pulled into the front row of parking spots, taking up space with the casual authority of people who didn't ask permission for anything. The engines cut one by one, leaving behind a ringing silence that felt heavier than the noise. Men climbed off, stretching, adjusting vests covered in patches Emma didn't understand, but recognized as significant. Leather, chrome, boots that hit the pavement with purpose. These weren't weekend riders. These were the kind of men who made people lock their car doors. Emma stayed very still on her crate, hoping to be invisible, hoping they'd get gas, use the bathroom, leave, hoping whatever violence lived inside men like that would stay sleeping. Then she saw the little girl. She climbed off the back of the last bike carefully, like she was stepping down from something much taller than she was. Maybe 10 or 11 years old, small for her age, wearing a denim jacket, too big for her frame, and sneakers with mismatched laces. Her hair was brown, pulled into a messy braid that had come half undone. She held her hands close to her chest, fingers moving in small, restless patterns, like she was counting something invisible. Emma's breath stopped. For one terrible, impossible second, the girl wasn't a stranger. She was Lily. Lily, 5 years old, standing at the edge of the community pool in her yellow swimsuit with the ruffled straps. Lily looking back at Emma with trust so complete it hurt to remember. Lily slipping on the wet concrete, falling into the deep end where she couldn't touch, where Emma couldn't reach her in time, where everything ended before anyone understood it was ending. Emma blinked hard. The girl wasn't Lily. Lily was dead. This was someone else's little sister, someone else's daughter, someone else's responsibility. But the resemblance was enough to make Emma's hands shake. The biggest man in the group, the one with gray streaks in his beard and a leather vest that said something about being a road captain, crouched down in front of the girl. He was signing with his hands, movements quick and practiced. The girl watched his fingers, then responded with her own hands slower, hesitant. Emma realized with a jolt the girl was deaf. The man signed something else, pointed toward the gas station convenience store. The girl nodded. He stood, touched her shoulder gently, protectively, then walked inside with two other men. The rest of the group stayed near the bikes, talking quietly, watching the road like they expected trouble. The little girl stood alone by the curb, rocking on her heels. Her gaze drifted across the parking lot, unfocused, until it landed on the train tracks visible beyond the chain-link fence behind the station. Something about those tracks caught her attention. She took a step toward them. Then another. Emma stood up without deciding to. Her body moved before her brain gave permission. She dropped her sponge back into the bucket and took 3 steps toward the girl, close enough to be noticed, but not close enough to frighten. "Hey," Emma said, then realized the girl couldn't hear her. She said it again anyway, louder. "Hey, miss, you should stay near your dad." The girl didn't turn. She kept walking toward the fence, toward the gap, where the chain link had been cut open by people who used the tracks as a shortcut. Emma's pulse quickened. She glanced at the bikers by the pumps, but none of them were watching the girl. They were talking among themselves, relaxed, unaware. Emma looked back at the girl. She'd reached the fence. She was slipping through the gap. Emma ran. Her sneakers hit the pavement hard, the flapping sole making a slapping sound that seemed too loud. She cut across the lot, dodged a parked truck, and reached the fence just as the girl stepped onto the gravel shoulder beyond it. "Stop!" Emma called out, useless, desperate. "Please stop." The girl kept walking. She stepped over a broken beer bottle, then a discarded tire, moving with the dreamy aimlessness of someone who couldn't hear danger coming. The train tracks were 15 yards away now. The girl was heading straight for them. Emma squeezed through the fence, gap metal scraping her shoulder. She sprinted across the gravel legs, pumping, lungs burning. The girl reached the first rail and paused, looking down at it like it was interesting, like it was just a piece of metal and not something that could kill her. Then the crossing lights started flashing. Red lights, warning bells, and the girl didn't flinch. She didn't hear any of it. Emma's vision narrowed to a single point, the girl standing between the rails, small and unaware. She looked so much like Lily. So much like the moment Emma had failed 3 years ago, the moment she'd been too slow, too far away, too helpless. She couldn't fail again. She wouldn't. Emma closed the distance in 4 strides, grabbed the girl's jacket, and yanked her backward just as the train horn blasted. The sound was enormous, a wall of noise that physically pushed against Emma's chest. The girl's eyes went wide with confusion. She didn't understand why she was being pulled. She struggled, tried to twist free, but Emma held on, dragging her off the tracks, away from the rails, back toward the gravel. The train roared into view, a freight engine moving fast, too fast to stop even if the engineer had seen them. Emma threw herself backward, pulling the girl with her, and they both went down hard onto the gravel and weeds. Emma felt the impact in her shoulder, her hip, her elbow. Pain flared bright and sharp. The girl landed on top of her, small and solid and alive. The train screamed past, close enough that Emma felt the wind of it tug at her hair. The wheels shrieked against the rails, metal grinding metal, the sound so loud it erased thought. Emma wrapped her arms around the girl and pressed the child's face into her shoulder, shielding her from the noise she couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. The train cars blurred together one after another, an endless chain of steel moving faster than anything that size should move. And then it was past. The last car rattled by the noise fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt impossible after so much sound. Emma's ears rang. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The girl pulled back, eyes huge, hands shaking. She looked at Emma, then at the tracks, then back at Emma. Understanding dawned slowly across her face. Fear, realization, gratitude. Emma's throat constricted. She couldn't speak, couldn't explain. All she could do was hold this child who looked like Lily, who could have died like Lily, who was alive because Emma had been fast enough at this time. Tears burned Emma's eyes. She blinked them back hard. The girl reached up and touched Emma's face with small, gentle fingers. She made a sound, not quite words, more like a hum of distress. Then she pointed to her ear. Emma saw it then, the hearing device, small and beige, hanging loose behind the girl's ear instead of seated properly. It must have come loose during the motorcycle ride. That's why she hadn't heard the train. That's why she'd walked onto the tracks like they were safe. Footsteps pounded across the gravel. Emma looked up to see the big man with the gray beard running toward them, face white with panic. Behind him, the other bikers were coming too, moving fast but controlled hands near their vests, like they were ready for violence. The man dropped to his knees in front of the girl, hands flying through sign language so fast Emma couldn't follow. The girl responded, pointing at Emma, then at the tracks, then making a motion like a train speeding past. Her hands shook as she signed. The man's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: terror, relief, fury, then something softer that looked almost like grief. He pulled the girl into his arms and held her tight, eyes squeezed shut. His shoulders shook once. The other bikers reached them, forming a loose circle, staring at Emma like they were trying to figure out what she was. One of them, younger with a scar across his eyebrow, spoke first. Kid pulled her off the tracks. His voice carried disbelief, like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. The big man opened his eyes and looked at Emma. His gaze was intense, searching, the kind of look that saw through lies and excuses straight to the truth underneath. "You," he said, voice rough, "you saved her." Emma nodded once. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She couldn't hear the train. The man glanced at the hearing device, then at the tracks, then back at Emma. Something in his face cracked open. "What's your name, Emma?" "Emma." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. "My name is Mason Cross. This is my daughter, Lena." He stroked Lena's hair once gently, then carefully adjusted her hearing device back into place. Lena flinched when sound returned, pressing her palms to her ears. Mason signed something to her, slow and reassuring. She lowered her hands, gradually looking between Emma and her father with wide, uncertain eyes. Mason stood, lifting Lena with him. He set her down carefully, keeping one hand on her shoulder. His gaze never left Emma. "You just saved my daughter's life." Emma didn't know what to say to that. She'd done what anyone would do, what she should have done for Lily, but couldn't. Her chest felt too tight. She just nodded again. Another biker stepped closer, this one with tattooed arms and a shaved head. "How old are you, kid?" 13. 13. The man shook his head slowly. "You got more guts than most grown men." Emma looked down at her scraped hands, at the blood seeping from her torn palm where she'd landed on gravel. The pain was starting to register now, dull and throbbing. She was suddenly very aware of how dirty her clothes were, how her shoes were falling apart, how these men were looking at her like she was something unusual instead of just another invisible kid from Ashland. Mason reached into his vest and pulled out a wallet. Emma's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming. Money, payment, the transaction that would turn her into someone who saved a life for profit instead of just doing the right thing. "No," she said quickly. "I don't want money." Mason paused, wallet open in his hand. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He studied her for a long moment, then slowly put the wallet away. The gesture felt significant, like she'd passed some kind of test. "Then we do this a different way," he said. He crouched down to Emma's level, making himself smaller, less intimidating. "Where are your parents?" Emma's chest tightened. "Just my mom. She's at home." "Does she know you're here?" Ma didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Mason's expression shifted, something like understanding passing across his face. He glanced at her bucket and cardboard sign by the gas pumps, then at her torn shoes and dirty clothes. When he looked back at Emma, his eyes held the kind of sad knowledge that came from recognizing pain you'd seen before. "You're taking care of her, aren't you?" A lump formed in Emma's throat. Nobody was supposed to know that. Nobody was supposed to see. "We're fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the lie. Mason nodded slowly. "Okay." He stood up. "But I need to talk to your mom. I need to tell her what you did." Panic flared in Emma's chest. "You don't have to." "Yeah," Mason said gently. "I do. Because what you did matters. And because sometimes people need help accepting help." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but she was 13 and exhausted and bleeding, and this man had eyes that saw too much. She nodded once, defeated. "Where do you live, Ashland?" "Parkview Apartments." Something flickered across Mason's face. Recognition, maybe. Or pity. The Parkview Apartments weren't apartments so much as a collection of buildings slowly falling apart, held together by desperation and unpaid maintenance requests. Everyone in Bolar knew what Parkview meant. Mason turned to his group. Jace, you take Lena on your bike. I'm riding with Emma. A quieter biker with kind eyes stepped forward. You got it. He signed something to Lena, who looked uncertain but nodded. Mason picked her up and set her gently on Jace's bike, making sure her helmet was secure. Lena kept looking back at Emma like she was afraid Emma would disappear. Mason walked to his own bike, a big black machine with worn leather saddlebags. He pulled out a spare helmet and brought it to Emma. Ever been on a motorcycle? Numb? It's easy. You hold on to me. Don't let go. He said it like a promise, like he was going to make sure she was safe whether she wanted him to or not. Emma took the helmet. It was too big, sliding down over her eyes until Mason adjusted the straps. Then she climbed onto the back of the bike, awkward and uncertain. Mason settled in front of her, solid and calm. Arms around my waist, he instructed. Emma hesitated, then wrapped her arms around him. He felt stable, like something that couldn't be moved. Ready, Emma wasn't ready, but she nodded anyway. The engine started, 8 bikes roaring to life in synchronized thunder. Emma's heart jumped into her throat. Then they were moving, rolling out of the gas station parking lot in formation, weaving around a pickup truck that had pulled over on the shoulder. Emma caught a glimpse of the driver standing outside his vehicle with a phone pressed to his ear, staring at them as they passed. He'd probably been watching the whole time. Probably called someone. The thought made Emma's stomach twist with unease, but the bikes were already accelerating, leaving the gas station behind. The world blurred past. Wind whipped Emma's hair back, pulled at her clothes, made her eyes water. She held on tighter, feeling the rumble of the engine through her whole body. The other bikes rode around them, protective, deliberate. Cars moved aside. Pedestrians stopped and stared. Emma had never been visible before. Now she felt like she was taking up all the space in the world. They rode through downtown Bolar, past the courthouse and the library and the diner where Emma used to go with her family before everything fell apart. They crossed the railroad tracks with a jarring bump that made Emma's teeth click together. And then they were in Ashland, where the houses got smaller and the paint peeled and the yards filled with cars that hadn't run in years. The bikes slowed as they approached Parkview. Emma felt shame rise hot in her throat. She didn't want these men to see where she lived, didn't want them to know how bad it was. But they were already here, engines idling in front of the building with its cracked stucco and rusted railings and windows covered with sheets instead of curtains. Mason killed his engine. The others followed. In the sudden silence, Emma could hear her own heartbeat, loud and frantic. She climbed off the bike on shaky legs and pulled off the helmet. Mason took it from her gently. Which one is yours? Emma pointed to the second-floor apartment, 2C. Mason nodded, then started walking toward the stairs. Emma followed, legs heavy, dread building with each step. Behind them, the other bikers stayed by their machines, alert and watchful. A few apartment doors cracked open, curious faces peering out, then slamming shut when they saw the leather vests. They reached 2C. Emma pulled her key from her pocket, hand trembling. My mom isn't, she's not. The words stuck. How did you explain that your mother was broken, that she'd stopped being a mother 3 years ago and hadn't figured out how to start again? I understand, Mason said quietly, and something in his voice said he did. Emma unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment smelled stale, like old laundry and forgotten food. The living room was dim, curtains drawn against the daylight. Dishes were stacked in the sink. Mail lay unopened on the coffee table, most of it stamped with red warnings. Final notice, past due, shut off pending. Mason stepped inside, taking it all in without judgment. Lena followed, holding Jace's hand, her eyes wide as she looked around. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator struggling to stay cold. Then a door down the hall opened. Linda Hartley emerged from her bedroom wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that hung off one shoulder. Her hair was tangled, unwashed. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She looked at Mason and froze, fear and confusion warring across her face. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. Who are you? What do you want? Emma stepped between them instinctively. Mom, it's okay. Emma. Linda's gaze snapped to her daughter, finally seeing her. What's going on? Why are there... She looked past Emma at Mason, at Lena, at Jace, standing in the doorway. Why are there bikers in our home? Mason spoke before Emma could. His voice was calm, respectful. Ma'am, my name is Mason Cross. Your daughter just saved my little girl's life. Linda blinked. The words didn't seem to register at first. What? She pulled her off the train tracks, right before the train came. If Emma hadn't been there, Mason's voice caught slightly. My daughter would be dead. Linda's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, then something that looked almost like pride trying to surface through 3 years of depression. She looked at Emma like she was seeing her for the first time in a long time. Emma, you did that? Emma nodded, throat tight. I had to, Mom. She couldn't hear the train. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She took a shaky step forward, then another, then pulled Emma into her arms. It was the first time she'd hugged her daughter in months. Emma went rigid at first, not used to being held, then slowly melted into it. Linda smelled like unwashed hair and old perfume, but Emma didn't care. Her mother was holding her. Her mother was awake. Oh my God, Linda whispered into Emma's hair. Oh my God, baby. Lena stepped forward, pulling away from Jace. She walked up to Emma and Linda, then very gently tapped Emma's arm. Emma pulled back enough to look down at her. Lena's hands moved in sign language, slow and deliberate. Emma didn't understand the words, but she understood the emotion. She's saying thank you, Mason translated quietly. She's saying you're brave. Emma crouched down to Lena's level. The girl's face was so earnest, so grateful, so alive. Emma's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back since the tracks. You're welcome, she said, knowing Lena couldn't hear, but hoping she could see the words in Emma's face. Lena reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a keychain with a tiny metal angel on it. She held it out to Emma. Emma looked at Mason uncertain. He nodded. Emma took the keychain, closing her fingers around the cool metal. Thank you, she whispered. Lena smiled, then signed something else. Mason's voice went soft. She says you're her guardian angel. Emma's chest felt like it might split open. She pulled Lena into a hug, careful and tight, and Lena held on like she'd found something she'd been looking for. Over the girl's head, Emma met Mason's eyes. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or recognition. A hard knock slammed against the front door, making everyone jump. 3 sharp hits, aggressive and official. Mason's entire posture changed. He straightened, eyes going hard, one hand moving slightly toward his vest. Jace stepped fully into the apartment and closed the door behind him, positioning himself between Lena and the unknown threat. The knock came again, louder. A voice called through the door, "Police!" "Open up!" Linda's face went white. She looked at Mason with sudden terror, like she'd just realized what it meant to have bikers in her home. Oh no, this is... Mason lifted one hand, calm but commanding. Stay quiet, let me handle this. Emma's stomach dropped through the floor. The keychain angel dug into her palm as she clenched her fist around it. She'd saved a life. She'd done the right thing. So why did it feel like everything was about to fall apart? Mason walked to the door, steady and unhurried, and opened up. 2 police officers stood in the hallway. Emma recognized them immediately. Officer Talon, young and ambitious, with eyes that never quite settled, and Captain Decker, older and harder, with a face like concrete. They both wore expressions that had nothing to do with gratitude. Decker's gaze swept past Mason into the apartment, cataloging everything: the mess, Linda's disheveled appearance, Emma's torn clothes, Lena's small, frightened face. His mouth tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile. Mr. Cross, he said, we need to talk. Mason didn't step aside. About what? About the incident at the train tracks, about you removing a minor from the scene. Decker's eyes moved to Emma. About this child and whether she's in a safe environment. Emma felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. They weren't here to thank her. They were here to take her away. Mason spoke with quiet authority, safe from what Decker's smile sharpened. That's what we're here to determine. And Emma understood with horrible clarity, saving Lena hadn't ended anything. It had started something much worse. Captain Decker didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped forward, forcing Mason to either move or create a confrontation. Mason held his ground for one long second, then stepped aside with deliberate slowness, making it clear he was choosing to allow this, not submitting to it. Decker walked into the apartment like he owned it, eyes sweeping across the stacked dishes, the unopened bills, the general air of neglect that clung to everything. Officer Talon followed more hesitantly, his gaze lingering on Emma, with something that might have been sympathy before his training kicked in and his face went neutral. Linda pressed herself against the wall, arms wrapped around her middle like she could make herself smaller. Emma wanted to go to her mother, but her legs wouldn't move. Lena grabbed Jace's jacket with both hands, watching the police with the wariness of someone who'd learned that uniforms didn't always mean safety. Decker's attention fixed on Emma. Emma Hartley, is it? Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. I need you to tell me what happened at those tracks, in your own words. Emma swallowed hard. I saw Lena walking toward the train tracks. Her hearing device was loose. She couldn't hear the train coming. I ran and pulled her off before what? Decker interrupted. Before you put yourself in danger. Before you touched a child you didn't know. Emma's mouth fell open. I saved her. That's one interpretation. Decker pulled a small notepad from his pocket, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. Another interpretation is that you were working the gas station alone, unsupervised, approached a minor child and physically grabbed her. He looked up, eyes cold. That could be seen as attempted abduction. The word hit Emma like a slap. What? No. Mason's voice cut across the room, sharp and controlled. My daughter was on the tracks. The train was coming. This girl saved her life. Those are the facts. Decker turned to Mason slowly. Mr. Cross, you and your associates arrived at the gas station shortly before the incident. You have a history with law enforcement in 3 counties. Your daughter ends up on train tracks while in your care, and then you take the child who rescued her back to her home. He made air quotes around the word rescued. From my perspective, this looks like negligence on your part, followed by an attempt to control the narrative. Mason's jaw tightened, but his tone didn't waver. My daughter is deaf. Her hearing device malfunctioned. Emma acted when no one else did. Including, he added with deliberate emphasis, the officer who waved my daughter toward the shortcut in the first place. Talon went rigid. I didn't. You were at the gas station 5 minutes before we arrived. Mason continued, gaze locked on Talon. You gestured toward the other side of the tracks when my daughter looked confused about which way to go. My daughter watches hands, officer. She saw yours, and she followed your direction. The color drained from Talon's face. Decker's expression hardened into something dangerous. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Cross. One you can't prove. The gas station has security cameras, Mason said calmly, as does the railroad crossing. I'm sure the footage will show exactly what happened. A beat of tense silence filled the apartment. Emma watched Decker's face, saw something shift behind his eyes. Calculation. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. Well, then we'll need to secure that footage. As evidence. He turned back to Emma. Young lady, I need to ask you some questions. Alone. No, Linda's voice came out thin but firm. She pushed away from the wall, standing straighter. You're not questioning my daughter without me present. Decker's gaze moved to Linda, taking in her unwashed hair, her trembling hands, her obvious fragility. Mrs. Hartley, is it, or Miss? It's Miss Hartley. Linda lifted her chin slightly. My daughter saved a child's life. Why are you treating her like a criminal? I'm not treating anyone like anything, Decker said smoothly. I'm conducting a welfare check. It's come to our attention that your daughter has been working unsupervised at the gas station, that she's been out of school, that there may be concerns about the living situation here. Linda's face went pale. We're managing. Are you? Decker gestured at the apartment, at the mess, at Linda herself. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a child is taking care of an adult who can't take care of herself. Tears sprang to Linda's eyes. Emma felt rage boil up in her chest, hot and fierce. Don't talk to my mother like that. Decker's eyebrows rose. Excuse me, you heard me? Emma's hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. We're poor. That doesn't mean my mom doesn't love me. It doesn't mean I'm not safe. Decker pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Ms. Hartley, we've received multiple reports from neighbors about this apartment. Noise complaints, concerns about a minor being left alone for extended periods. One report from a Dale Haskins specifically mentioned truancy and possible neglect. Emma's stomach twisted. Dale Haskins, the neighbor who always watched through his peephole, who complained about everything, who she'd caught going through their trash once. He'd reported them. Linda's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto the couch, head in her hands. Please, she whispered. Please don't take my daughter. Decker looked at her without compassion. That's not my decision to make. But Child Protective Services will need to be contacted. They'll make an assessment about whether Emma should remain in this home. You can't. Linda looked up, face streaked with tears. She's all I have, please. Mason stepped forward, placing himself between Decker and Linda. Captain, this is harassment. You came here under the pretense of investigating an incident at the tracks, and now you're threatening to break up a family. I'm doing my job, Decker said flatly. Your job is to protect and serve, not to punish people for being poor. Decker's smile vanished. My job is to make sure children are safe. And right now I'm looking at a mother who can't get out of bed, a daughter who's been forced to work the streets, and a group of bikers who've inserted themselves into this situation for reasons I don't trust. I saved a little girl, Emma said, voice breaking. That's the only reason. Why can't you just believe that? Decker looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was almost kind, which made it worse. Because in my experience, Emma, things are never that simple. He turned to Tayland. Radio for backup. We're taking the minor into protective custody pending a CPS evaluation. No. Linda lunged forward, but Decker held up a hand. Ma'am, if you interfere, I'll have to arrest you for obstruction. Is that what you want? Mason's voice cut through the chaos. Emma, don't say anything else. Not without a lawyer, Decker's eyes flashed. She's a minor, Mr. Cross. We don't need... She has the right to counsel, so does her mother. Mason pulled out his phone. I'm calling one now. Put the phone away, Mr. Cross. Or what? Mason's tone didn't change, but something dangerous entered his posture. Behind him, Jace shifted and two more bikers appeared in the doorway, blocking the exit. Not threatening, just present. Decker's hand moved toward his belt, toward his service weapon. Talen took a half step forward, looking between his captain and Mason with growing unease. The apartment felt like it was shrinking, the air getting thicker. Lena made a small, frightened sound. The noise broke through the tension like glass shattering. Mason immediately turned to her, signing quickly. It's okay. Stay calm. You're safe. Lena signed back, hands moving her frantically. Mason's expression darkened as he watched her fingers. He looked at Decker, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. My daughter just told me that Officer Taylan was the one who gestured toward the tracks. She remembers because he smiled at her first, made her feel safe. Taylan went white. I didn't know she was going to Tayland. Decker's voice cracked like a whip. Shut up. But the damage was done. Tayland's partial admission hung in the air, impossible to take back. Mason's gaze never left Decker. You know what happened? You know it's the railroad's fault for poor maintenance, for blind corners, for shortcuts people use because proper crossings are half a mile away. And you know your officer made it worse. So instead of doing the right thing, you're trying to find someone else to blame. Mason's voice dropped lower. You're trying to blame a 13-year-old girl who had the courage to do what your officer didn't. Decker's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have every idea. Mason took a step closer. I know how systems work. I know how they protect themselves. I know how they eat people like Emma and Linda and spit out the bones. I've seen it before. I've lived it. For a moment, something passed between the two men. Recognition, understanding. They were both seeing the same thing from different sides, a system that didn't care about truth as much as it cared about liability. Decker broke eye contact first. He turned to Talon. Go to the car, file an initial report. I'll handle this. Talon hesitated, clearly torn. He looked at Emma, at Lena, at the scene he'd helped create. Then he walked out without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Decker waited until the door closed. Then he turned back to Mason. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to secure the footage from the railroad. We're going to conduct a proper investigation. And if I find out you've tampered with evidence, intimidated witnesses, or done anything that compromises this case, I will bury you. He looked at Emma. All of you. Mason pulled out his phone. Then we do this by the book. I'm calling an attorney. You don't speak to Emma or Linda without counsel present. Decker's smile was thin and sharp. Fine. Call your lawyer, but understand something, Mr. Cross. He leaned in closer, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. In this town, I decide what the book says. And right now it's saying this girl and her mother are in trouble. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Ms. Hartley, I'll be filing a report with Child Protective Services. Someone will contact you within 48 hours. I suggest you use that time to get your house in order. Literally. Then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Linda collapsed into sobs. Emma went to her mother kneeling beside the couch, wrapping her arms around Linda's shaking shoulders. It's okay, Mom. It's going to be okay. But she didn't believe it. Neither did Linda. They both knew what happened when CPS got involved. They both knew families like theirs didn't win against the system. Mason stood in the middle of the room, phone in hand, jaw tight. After a moment, he dialed. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Leah Palmer, attorney at law. Ms. Palmer, my name is Mason Cross. I need legal representation for a client in Bolar. It's urgent. He glanced at Emma and Linda. It's very urgent. 20 minutes later, they were moving. Not because they wanted to, but because Mason insisted they couldn't stay in the apartment. Decker will have someone watching the building, he explained. Waiting for you to do something stupid. Waiting for evidence that Linda can't handle this. Linda looked around the apartment helplessly. Where are we supposed to go? Somewhere public. Somewhere with cameras and witnesses. Mason held out his phone, showing an address. There's a diner on 5th Street, open 24 hours. We meet the lawyer there, we file protective orders, and we get ahead of this before Decker controls the entire narrative. Emma looked at her mother. Linda's eyes were red and puffy, but something had shifted in her expression. She wasn't catatonic anymore. Fear had shocked her awake. Okay, Linda said quietly. Okay, let me get dressed. She disappeared into her bedroom. Emma stood in the middle of the living room, feeling unmoored. Everything had happened so fast. 3 hours ago, she'd been washing cars. Now she was caught in something she didn't understand, something involving police and lawyers, and threats she couldn't fully comprehend. Lena approached Emma slowly. She held out her hand, palm up. Emma took it, and Lena squeezed gently. The girl signed something Emma couldn't read, but the meaning was clear in her eyes. I'm sorry. This is my fault. Emma shook her head hard. No, she said firmly, even though Lena couldn't hear. She pointed at herself, then at Lena, then made a gesture that she hoped conveyed protection. I'm glad I saved you. I'd do it again. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She threw her arms around Emma's waist, holding on tight. Emma hugged her back, this strange little girl who looked like Lily, who felt like a second chance at redemption. Mason watched them with an unreadable expression. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. My wife died 9 years ago. Cancer. We had insurance, but the company found reasons not to pay. Experimental treatment, they said. Not covered. Pre-existing condition they claimed she never disclosed. His voice went hollow. She died because the system valued money more than her life. I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone else if I could help it. Emma looked up at him. Is that why you became a biker partially? Mason managed a small smile. Mostly I was angry. Angry at a world that breaks people and then blames them for being broken. The club became my family. My way of protecting people who fall through the cracks. He met Emma's eyes. You fell through the cracks, Emma, but you didn't break. You stayed brave. You saved my daughter. And now I'm going to make sure the cracks don't swallow you. Emma's chest tightened. Why do you care this much? Mason was quiet for a long moment. Because nobody cared for us. And I remember what that feels like. Linda emerged from the bedroom wearing clean jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked more like herself than she had in months. Still fragile but present. I'm ready, she said. They left through the back stairwell, avoiding the front where a police cruiser had parked with a clear view of their door. The bikers formed up around them, not aggressive, just vigilant. They walked 3 blocks to where the motorcycles were parked in an alley hidden from the main street. Mason handed helmets to Emma and Linda. We're going to the railroad office first, before the diner. Linda blinked. Why? Because that footage Decker mentioned, he's going to try to secure it, which means erasing anything that doesn't fit his story. Mason's voice was grim. We need to get there first. Emma's heart started pounding. Won't that make things worse? Not if we do it right, not if we document everything. Mason looked at Jace. You bring Lena to the diner. Keep her safe. Emma and Linda ride with me and Marcus. He nodded toward another biker, a quiet man with kind eyes. We get the footage, we get out. We let the lawyer handle the rest. Linda looked terrified. I don't know if I can... You can, Emma said suddenly. Her mother looked at her in surprise. Emma took Linda's hand. We can, Mom. Together. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded. Together. They mounted the bikes. Emma rode behind Mason again, her arms around his waist. Linda rode with Marcus, gripping his jacket like it was a lifeline. The engines roared to life and they shot out of the alley into the late afternoon sun. The Bolar Rail Office was a squat brick building near the freight yard surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. Mason pulled into the small parking lot followed by Marcus and two other bikes. The rest of the club peeled off heading to the diner with Lena and Jace. Mason dismounted and helped Emma off. He looked at the security cameras, then at Emma. We're being recorded right now. That's good. It means everything we do here is documented. We walk in, we ask politely for the crossing footage, and we explain why we need it. No threats, no intimidation, just the truth. Emma nodded, though her stomach was churning. Linda stood beside her, pale but determined. They walked into the office together. A tired-looking man behind the counter glanced up, saw the leather vests, and immediately reached for the phone. Please don't, Mason said calmly, holding up both hands to show they were empty. We're not here to cause trouble. We need to speak to whoever manages the crossing camera footage. The man his name tag read, Stan Wilkes, swallowed hard. That would be Mr. Carden. But he's busy. It's urgent. Mason kept his voice level and polite. A child nearly died at the crossing today. We need the footage preserved before it's accidentally deleted. Stan's eyes widened. A kid almost, he stopped himself. I can't just give out footage. You need law enforcement authorization. Law enforcement is part of the problem, Emma said before she could stop herself. Stan looked at her properly for the first time. He saw a 13-year-old girl with scraped hands and frightened eyes. His expression softened slightly. What happened? Emma took a breath. This was it. The moment she decided whether to trust a stranger or stay silent. She thought about Lily, about 3 years of carrying guilt alone, about Lena who would be dead if Emma had stayed quiet. She told him everything. She told him about seeing Lena walk toward the tracks, about the loose hearing device, about the train coming and the terrible silence where Lena should have heard danger but didn't. She told him about pulling the girl off the rails, about the way the train had passed so close she felt the wind of it. She told him about the police showing up and treating her like a criminal instead of thanking her. She told him about Captain Decker threatening to take her away from her mother because they were poor and struggling and convenient scapegoats. By the time she finished, Stan's eyes were wet. He glanced at Linda, who was crying quietly, then back at Emma. You're just a kid, he said, voice rough. I know. Emma's voice cracked. But I couldn't let her die. I couldn't fail again. Again, Emma hadn't meant to say that part, but it was too late now. My little sister drowned 3 years ago. I was supposed to watch her. I was looking at my phone. By the time I looked up, she couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Stan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had changed. Wait here, he said quietly. He disappeared through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Mason put a hand on Emma's shoulder. You did good. Emma didn't feel like she'd done good. She felt like she'd torn herself open and bled in front of a stranger. Linda wrapped an arm around her, and Emma leaned into her mother's side, drawing strength from the contact. Minutes passed. Emma counted them by the industrial clock on the wall. 5 minutes. 7. 10. Then Stan returned, followed by a heavy-set man in a rail uniform who looked deeply unhappy. I'm Todd Carden, the man said. Yard supervisor. Stan says there was an incident at Crossing 12 today. Mason stepped forward. Yes, sir. My daughter nearly died there. This girl, he gestured to Emma, saved her. We need the camera footage preserved before anyone tries to make it disappear. Carden's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Mason spoke with quiet authority. Captain Decker has already indicated he intends to secure the footage. In my experience, secure is another word for bury when the truth is inconvenient. Carden looked at Emma for a long moment. You're the one who pulled the deaf kid off the tracks. Emma nodded. How old are you, 13? Carden shook his head slowly. Christ, he turned to Stan. Pull up the footage from Crossing 12. Timestamp approximately. He looked at Emma. When did this happen? Around 4:30, Emma said. Maybe 4:40. Carden nodded to Stan, who moved to a computer terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. A monitor flickered to life, showing grainy black and white footage of the railroad crossing. Stan scrubbed through the timeline, then stopped. There on the screen was Lena, small and alone, walking toward the tracks. The timestamp read 4:37 p.m. Then Emma appeared running, grabbing Lena, pulling her back. The train entered the frame, 2 seconds later, a massive blur of motion that would have pulverized anything in its path. Carden stared at the screen. Sweet Jesus, he breathed. That was close. Too close, Mason said quietly. Stan rewound the footage slightly. Wait, look. He pointed at the screen. There, before the girl shows up. They all leaned closer. In the grainy footage, a police cruiser was visible in the background of the gas station lot. A uniformed figure stood near the convenience store entrance. As Lena appeared on screen, confused and clearly looking for direction, the officer gestured. Not aggressively, almost casually, but definitely gesturing toward the far side of the tracks, toward the shortcut. Officer Talon. Carden's face went pale. Oh no. Oh yes, Mason said. His voice had gone very quiet. So you see why we need this footage preserved, and why we can't trust the police department to handle it. Carden looked between Mason and Emma, clearly torn between self-preservation and doing the right thing. Emma could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he made his decision. Stan flagged that footage for retention. Mark it as critical incident, do not delete. He pulled a USB drive from his desk drawer. And make a backup copy. Stan hesitated. Sir, if we give them the footage without authorization, we're not giving them anything. Carden interrupted. We're preserving evidence of a near-fatal incident at our crossing. It's policy. He met Stan's eyes with something that looked like determination. It's the right thing to do. Stan nodded slowly, then began copying the files. Carden's phone buzzed insistently on his desk. He glanced at the caller ID, and his face went a shade paler. It's corporate, he muttered. They must have been alerted to the incident flag. Don't answer it yet, Mason said quickly. Finish the copy first. Carden nodded, but his hands shook slightly as he worked. Emma could see the calculation in his eyes, job security versus doing the right thing. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Carden ignored it, fingers flying over the keyboard with new urgency. They're going to send someone, Carden said quietly. Corporate always sends someone when there's potential liability. Then we'd better be ready, Mason replied. The door to the office crashed open. Captain Decker strode in, Officer Talon behind him, both looking furious. Step away from that computer, Decker ordered. Carden straightened, squaring his shoulders. I'm performing my duty as yard supervisor. There was an incident at one of our crossings. I'm preserving the footage. That footage is evidence in an ongoing investigation. You will turn it over to me. Now, I'll turn it over to proper authorities through proper channels, Carden said. Not to an officer who appears in the footage itself. Decker's face flushed dark red. What did you say? Emma's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was it, the moment everything either came together or fell completely apart. Mason stepped forward, placing himself between Decker and the computer. The footage shows Officer Talon gesturing my daughter toward the tracks. It shows him creating the dangerous situation that this young woman had to correct. That's a lie, Decker snapped. Then let's watch it together. Mason gestured to the monitor. Right now, all of us. Let's see what really happened. Decker's eyes darted to Talon, who had gone white as paper. Talon's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. His silence was confirmation enough. Get out, Decker said through gritted teeth, looking at Mason. All of you, now, we're not finished, Mason said calmly. You're finished. When I say you're finished, Emma's anger held back for so long finally broke free. No, she said loudly. Everyone turned to look at her. No, we're not leaving. I saved a life today. I did something brave and good. And you, she pointed at Decker, you tried to make me feel like a criminal for it. You threatened my mom. You scared us. And I'm done being scared. Her voice was shaking, but the words kept coming. I'm 13 years old. I'm poor. My mom is sick. We're trying our best. And if doing the right thing means people like you come after us, then I don't care anymore. Because I know I did the right thing. I know it. She looked toward where Lena should be remembering the girl's face. I saved her. And you can't make that not true no matter how hard you try. The office was silent. Stan was staring at Emma with open admiration. Carden looked like he might cry. Even Talon seemed moved, his face crumpling with something that might have been shame. Then incredibly, Officer Talon spoke. She's right. His voice was barely above a whisper. I waved at the girl. I didn't know she was deaf. I was just trying to be helpful, point her toward the other side. But I should have been more careful. I should have, he looked at Decker. This is on me, not her, not the biker. Me. Talon stared at the monitor, watching his own gesture frozen in grainy black and white. Such a small thing. A casual wave meant to be helpful. He'd seen a confused kid and pointed her toward where she seemed to be going. He hadn't known she was deaf. Hadn't known she'd take his gesture as authorization to cross a dangerous shortcut. He thought about his sister Claire, who was deaf too. She'd taught him a few signs when they were kids, but he'd never really learned properly. Never thought it mattered that much. Claire was careful, aware of her limitations, always watching for danger. But she'd been an adult. Lena was just a child. If it had been Claire on those tracks, if some cop had casually waved her into danger, Talon looked at Emma, this skinny 13-year-old kid who'd done what he should have done, who'd seen danger and run toward it instead of creating it through carelessness. She was braver than he was, and she was about to be destroyed by a system that should have protected her. He thought about why he'd become a cop. Not for the power or the authority, not to follow orders blindly. He joined because his neighborhood had been rough, and he'd seen what happened when no one stepped up to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. When had he stopped being that person? Decker's voice cut through his thoughts. Talon, shut your mouth, a command, an order, the kind he'd been following for 5 years without question. But this time he couldn't. This time the order was wrong. Decker looked like he'd been slapped. Talon, shut your mouth. No, sir. Talon met his captain's eyes. I won't let a kid take the fall for my mistake. That's not what I became a cop to do. For a moment, Decker looked like he might explode. Then his face went cold and calculating. Fine, he said quietly. Then you just ended your career. He turned to Carden. I want that footage. I want it now. And I want written statements from everyone in this room. You'll get your statements, a new voice said from the doorway, through proper legal channels. Everyone turned. A woman in a tailored suit stood in the entrance, briefcase in hand, looking utterly unintimidated by the room full of police and bikers. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd won more battles than she'd lost. Leah Palmer, she announced, attorney representing Emma Hartley, Linda Hartley, and Mason Cross. She looked at Decker. Captain, I believe you have been attempting to question my minor client without parental consent and without counsel present. I believe you've threatened both my clients with actions unsupported by evidence. And I believe, she glanced at the computer screen, still showing the frozen image of Talon's gesture, that your department may have some liability concerns to address before you consider prosecuting anyone else. Decker's jaw worked silently. Emma had never seen an adult look so furious and so helpless at the same time. Palmer turned to Carden. Mr. Carden, I assume that footage is being properly preserved. Yes, ma'am, Carden said quickly. Multiple copies. Chain of custody documented. Excellent. Palmer pulled documents from her briefcase. Captain Decker, you're now served with notice that any further contact with my clients goes through me. Any threats, any intimidation, any attempts to interfere with their lives will result in immediate legal action. She handed him papers with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for checkmate. Decker took the papers, hands shaking with barely controlled rage. This isn't over. Actually, Palmer said with a small smile, I think it is. Stan, I'll need a copy of that footage for our records. Mr. Carden, please provide a written statement confirming the preservation and authenticity of the recording. Officer Talland, she looked at him with something that might have been respect. If you are willing to give an honest statement about what happened, my office would like to speak with you. Voluntarily, of course. Talland glanced at Decker, then back at Palmer. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion from carrying the weight of a lie. Yes, ma'am, I'll cooperate fully. Decker made a sound like a wounded animal. Then he turned and stormed out of the office, nearly taking the door off its hinges. The silence he left behind felt like breathing after drowning. Palmer turned to Emma and smiled. You must be Emma. Mason told me about you. You did something very brave today. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. I just did what I had to. That's what brave people always say. Palmer looked at Linda. Ms. Hartley, we need to talk about the CPS situation. But first, let's get everyone somewhere safe, somewhere public with witnesses. She glanced at Mason. The courthouse steps, I think, where cameras can see us. Mason nodded. That's what I thought too. They left the railroad office together, all of them carrying the USB drive that held the truth. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the industrial buildings in shades of orange and gold. Emma held her mother's hand on one side. The other bikers had returned with Lena, and the girl's small fingers slipped into Emma's other hand, Jace having brought her back, sensing the danger was over. They walked toward the courthouse like a strange parade biker's lawyers, a mother and daughter who'd been invisible until today, and a little deaf girl who'd nearly died and been saved by a stranger. Emma squeezed Lena's hand. Lena squeezed back. And for the first time since Lily died, Emma felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd done something that mattered. Something that made the world a little less broken. Even if the world was fighting back. The courthouse steps were made of granite, worn smooth by decades of desperate people climbing them in search of mercy or justice, or just someone who would listen. Emma sat on the fourth step up, Lena beside her, while attorney Leah Palmer set up a portable camera on a small tripod. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and Emma was acutely aware of how exposed they were. Anyone could see them. Everyone would see them. That was the point. Visibility is protection, Palmer had explained in the car. Once your story is public, once there are witnesses and documentation, it becomes much harder for anyone to make you disappear into the system. Linda sat on the step below Emma, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Mason stood off to one side with his bikers not hovering, but present. Ready, Officer Talon stood apart from everyone, looking like a man who'd stepped off a cliff and was waiting to see if he'd land on solid ground or rocks. Palmer checked the camera angle one more time, then nodded to herself. All right, we're recording. Emma, I need you to state your full name and tell me what happened today. Start from the beginning. Take your time. Emma's mouth went dry. She'd never been good at talking about herself, at being the center of attention. 3 years of trying to be invisible had trained her to stay quiet, stay small, stay unnoticed. But Lena's hand found hers again, squeezed gently, and Emma felt something shift inside her chest. She thought about Lily, about the silence that had followed her sister's death, the way their family had imploded because no one knew how to speak about pain. She thought about Linda, retreating into depression because talking hurt too much. She thought about herself carrying guilt alone because there was no one to share it with. No more silence. My name is Emma Hartley, she said, voice clearer than she expected. I'm 13 years old. This morning I was washing cars at the Bolar gas station to help pay rent because my mom has been sick and we needed money. A motorcycle club arrived. One of them had a daughter. Her name is Lena. Emma glanced at the little girl beside her. Lena was watching Emma's mouth, reading her lips with the intense concentration of someone for whom language required effort. Emma continued, Lena is deaf. She wears a hearing device, but it had come loose during the ride. She couldn't hear anything. I saw her walking toward the train tracks behind the gas station. I knew a train was coming because the warning bells were ringing and the lights were flashing. But she didn't hear any of it. Emma's voice caught. She swallowed hard and pushed on. I ran after her. I pulled her off the tracks right before the train came, maybe 2 seconds before. If I hadn't, she couldn't finish that sentence. Afterward, the police came. But they didn't thank me. They asked why I was at the gas station alone. They asked why I touched Lena. They made it sound like I did something wrong instead of something right. Linda made a small noise of distress. Emma reached down and squeezed her mother's shoulder. Then they came to our apartment. Captain Decker threatened to call Child Protective Services. He said our home wasn't safe. He said I shouldn't be working. He acted like being poor was the same as being a criminal. Emma's voice hardened. We're not criminals. My mom got sick after my little sister died. She has depression. She's trying her best. And I help because that's what families do. They help each other. Palmer's voice was gentle. Emma, can you tell me why you thought it was important to save Lena? You didn't know her. You could have been hurt. Emma's eyes filled with tears. This was the part she hadn't told anyone except Stan at the railroad office. This was the wound she kept hidden. 3 years ago, my little sister Lily drowned at the community pool. She was 5 years old. I was supposed to be watching her, but I was on my phone. By the time I looked up, she was in the water. I tried to save her. I jumped in. I pulled her out, but it was too late. The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. She died because I wasn't paying attention. She died because I failed. Linda was crying now, two quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Emma had never told her mother about the phone, about the split second of distraction that had cost Lily her life. She'd carried that guilt alone for 3 years. When I saw Lena on those tracks, Emma continued, voice breaking, I saw another little girl who was going to die if no one helped her. And I couldn't fail again. I couldn't live with myself if I let another child die when I could have saved her. She looked at Lena, at this small miracle sitting beside her. So I ran, and this time I was fast enough. Silence fell over the courthouse steps. Even the bikers, tough men who'd seen hard things, looked moved. Palmer wiped at her own eyes before speaking again. Thank you, Emma. That took courage. She turned the camera toward Linda. Miss Hartley, would you like to add anything? Linda looked up, face blotchy and wet. She seemed to gather herself, sitting straighter. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than Emma had heard in years. My name is Linda Hartley. I'm Emma's mother. And I've failed her. She said it plainly, without self-pity. When Lily died, I broke. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. I couldn't even get out of bed most days. Emma had to become the adult. She had to take care of me instead of me taking care of her. She's 13 years old and she's been carrying burdens no child should carry. Linda's voice cracked but didn't break. But even with all that, even while taking care of me, she still had the courage to save a stranger's child. She still had the strength to do the right thing. She's twice the person I've been these past 3 years. Linda looked directly at the camera. Captain Decker says our home isn't safe. He's wrong. The only thing that's been unsafe is a system that abandons families when they're struggling, then punishes them for not being perfect. We need help. We need support. But we don't need to be torn apart. Palmer nodded, then turned the camera to Mason. Mr. Cross, you're Emma's defender in this situation. Why? Mason was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. My wife died 9 years ago. Cancer. We had insurance, but the company found loopholes to avoid paying for her treatment. Experimental, they said. Not covered. She died because the system valued profit over people. His voice was steady but carried old pain. After that, I couldn't go back to my old life. Couldn't pretend everything was fine. I found others who felt the same. People the system had chewed up and spit out. We formed the club not to break laws, but to be family for each other. To protect people who fall through the cracks. He looked at Emma. This girl fell through the cracks. She's been invisible to everyone who should have helped her. But she didn't let that break her. She saved my daughter, and I'll be damned if I let the same system that killed my wife destroy her too. Palmer turned the camera back to Emma. Emma, one more question. What do you want people to know Emma thought about it? About the cars she'd washed, the invisibility she'd worn like armor, the exhaustion that lived in her bones. About Lily and Lena, and all the small moments that added up to a life. About her mother, sick but trying. About this strange found family of bikers who'd adopted her. I want people to know that poor doesn't mean bad, she said quietly. Struggling doesn't mean failing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help instead of pretending everything's fine. She squeezed Lena's hand. I also want people to know that Lena is alive because I didn't look away. And I'm proud of that. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of that. Palmer smiled. Thank you, Emma. She stopped recording and began packing up the camera. This testimony will be submitted to CPS, the railroad company, and the police department's internal affairs division. It's now part of the public record. Which means a car door slammed. Emma looked up to see Captain Decker striding across the courthouse, square-faced, thunderous. Behind him, 2 other officers followed at a distance, looking uncomfortable. What the hell do you think you're doing? Decker demanded when he reached the steps. Palmer stood, placing herself between Decker and her clients. Documenting my client's testimony, which is entirely within their rights. You're interfering with an investigation. There is no investigation, Palmer said calmly. There's a captain trying to cover his department's liability by scapegoating a child. But thanks to Officer Taland's honest statement and the railroad footage, we now have a clear picture of what actually happened. Decker's eyes cut to Taland, who stood at the edge of the group looking miserable but resolved. You're finished, Taland. You understand that? Taland met his captain's gaze. Yes, sir, I do. But I'm not going to let a kid suffer for my mistake. That's not what I signed up for. You signed up to follow orders. I signed up to protect and serve, Taland said quietly. not to protect liars and serve cover-ups. Decker's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Emma thought he might actually hit to land. Instead, he turned his fury on Palmer. You think you're clever. You think going public changes anything. It doesn't. That girl, he pointed at Emma, is still living in an unfit home with a mother who can't care for her. CPS will still make their assessment. Let them, Palmer said. But they'll do it fairly with full documentation of what Emma has accomplished and why this family is struggling. They'll see a daughter who saved a life and a mother who's fighting depression while still providing for her child. They'll see that poverty isn't the same as neglect. They'll see what I tell them to see. Palmer's smile was sharp. No, Captain. You lost that control the moment we went public. You lost it when Officer Talon chose honesty over loyalty. And you'll lose even more when the railroad company's investigation reveals that Crossing 12 has had 17 near-miss reports in the past 2 years, all of which your department failed to properly document. Decker went very still. How do you know about those reports? 'Cause I'm good at my job. Palmer pulled more papers from her briefcase. I'm also good at filing lawsuits. Linda Hartley versus Bowler Police Department for harassment and attempted family separation without cause. Emma Hartley versus the same for emotional distress and defamation. And if you'd like, we can add Mason Cross versus your department for discrimination and intimidation. You're bluffing. Try me. They stared at each other, two people engaged in a battle of wills with Emma's life hanging in the balance. Emma held her breath. Beside her, Lena gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Captain Decker stepped away from the civilians. Everyone turned. A woman in a police uniform was approaching, older than Decker, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen everything. The bars on her collar indicated high rank. Emma didn't know police insignia well, but this woman clearly outranked Decker. Deputy Chief Morrison, Decker said, voice strained. This is a local matter that just became a department matter the moment I received Officer Talon's statement and copies of the railroad footage. Morrison's voice was crisp and professional. She looked at Emma. You're Emma Hartley. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Morrison's expression softened slightly. I understand you saved a child's life today. That's commendable. She turned to Decker. Captain, you're relieved of duty pending an internal investigation into your handling of this incident and your relationship with Bolar Rail. Badge and service weapon. Now, Decker's face went from red to white. You can't, I can, and I am. Officer Talon's statement raises serious questions about your conduct. The railroad footage corroborates his account, and your aggressive response to a minor witness suggests compromised judgment at best. Morrison held out her hand. Badge, weapon. You're on administrative leave effective immediately. For a moment, Emma thought Decker might refuse. His hand hovered near his belt, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Then slowly he unclipped his badge and gun, handing them over with shaking hands. This isn't over, he said quietly. For you, it is, Morrison replied. She turned to Palmer. Counselor, I'd like to arrange a proper interview with your clients at their convenience. No threats, no intimidation. Just facts, Palmer nodded. We can do that, with the understanding that any CPS involvement will be handled through appropriate channels, with full consideration of the family's circumstances. Agreed. Morrison looked at Linda. Ms. Hartley, I want you to know that the department will be providing resources for families in crisis. We should have done that 3 years ago instead of waiting for things to reach this point. That's on us. Linda looked stunned, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Thank you, she whispered. Morrison nodded, then addressed the group as a whole. What happened today shouldn't have happened. A child saved another child, and instead of being celebrated, she was treated like a suspect. That's unacceptable. We're going to do better. She looked at Emma directly. You did something brave. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Emma felt something loosen in her chest. The weight she'd been carrying, the fear that had gripped her since the police first arrived began to ease. Not disappearing completely, she wasn't naive enough to think everything would be fine immediately, but lightening enough that she could breathe properly again. Decker turned and walked away, movement stiff and angry. The other officers who'd come with him exchanged glances, then followed at a respectful distance. Talon lingered, looking at Emma. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I made a mistake and you almost paid for it. That's not right, Emma studied him. He looked genuine, his shame evident in every line of his body. You told the truth when it mattered, she said finally. That counts for something. Talon's throat worked. He nodded once, then turned and left. Morrison stayed a moment longer. Miss Palmer, please contact my office to schedule those interviews. And Mrs. Hartley, both of you, she looked at Linda and Emma. If you experience any further harassment from anyone in this department, you call me directly. She handed Palmer a business card. I mean that. Then she too was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt entirely different from the heavy, oppressive quiet of before. This silence was clean, hopeful. Mason let out a long breath. Well, he said, that went better than expected. Palmer laughed a quick surprise sound. Better than expected, Mason, we just won. Did we? Emma asked. She wanted to believe it, but 3 years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious about hope. Palmer crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. Yes, Emma, we won. CPS will still visit. They have to. It's protocol. But they'll see a family that's struggling but functional, a mother who's getting help, a daughter who's extraordinary, and they'll close the case. She squeezed Emma's shoulder. You're not going anywhere. You're staying with your mom. You're safe. Emma felt tears burn her eyes again, but these were different. These were relief and exhaustion and the strange sensation of a future opening up that had seemed closed just hours ago. What about school? You're going back, Linda said suddenly. Emma turned to look at her mother. Linda was crying but smiling too. You're going back to school, baby, where you belong. I'm going to get help, real help, therapy, maybe medication, whatever it takes, because you deserve a mother who functions. You deserve a childhood. Mom, Emma's voice broke. No, let me say this. Linda cupped Emma's face in her hands. You saved that little girl because you have a hero's heart. You got that from your father, the man he was before he left, before everything broke. But you also have something he didn't have. You have the strength to stay, to keep trying even when it's hard. You have been so much stronger than me, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry I made you have to be. Emma threw her arms around her mother, and they held each other while the sun set behind the courthouse, and the shadows grew long, and the bikers watched quietly, giving them this moment of privacy in public. Lena tugged on Emma's sleeve. When Emma pulled back and looked down, Lena signed something slow and careful. Mason translated, voice soft. She says you're her sister now. Her brave, big sister. Emma looked at this little girl who looked like Lily, who'd given her a chance at redemption she didn't know she needed. Tell her yes, Emma said. Tell her I'll always be her big sister. Mason signed the message. Lena's face lit up with joy so pure it hurt to look at. She threw her arms around Emma's waist, and Emma held her close, this unexpected gift. 3 months later, Emma Hartley walked through the doors of Bolar Middle School for the first time since 6th grade. She carried a new backpack, not expensive, but due, bought with money from a scholarship fund that Mason had set up under a false name, because he knew Linda wouldn't accept charity, but couldn't refuse a scholarship. She wore clean clothes that fit properly. Her shoes didn't have holes. The halls were crowded and loud and overwhelming. Emma had forgotten what it was like to be surrounded by kids her own age, to hear lockers slamming and friends laughing and teachers calling for attention. She felt out of place, too old and too young at the same time. Then someone called her name. Emma Hartley. She turned to see a girl from her old 6th grade class, Melissa. Something running toward her with a huge smile. Oh my God, you're back. I saw the news story about you. You're like famous. Emma blinked. I'm not. Are you kidding? You saved a little kid from a train? That's amazing. Melissa grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward a group of students. You guys, this is Emma. She's the hero from the news. Suddenly, Emma was surrounded by curious faces, questions flying at her from all directions. It was overwhelming and strange, and not entirely comfortable, but it was also visibility. Not the bad kind that came with poverty and suspicion. The good kind. The kind where people saw her and wanted to know her. A teacher approached an older woman with kind eyes. Emma Hartley, I'm Mrs. Brennan. I teach 8th grade English. I've been asked to help you transition back to school. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Emma nodded, grateful for the rescue from the crowd. She followed Mrs. Brennan to a quiet classroom away from the chaos. First, Mrs. Brennan said, I want you to know that we're aware of your situation. We know you've been out of school helping your family. We know what you did at those train tracks. And we want you to know that Bolar Middle School is committed to helping you succeed. We have tutoring, available counseling if you need it, and a peer support group for students dealing with family challenges. Emma's chest tightened. I don't want special treatment. It's not special treatment, Mrs. Brennan said gently. It's meeting you where you are. You've been through things most adults never face. You've shown incredible strength, but you're also 13 and you deserve support. She pulled out a folder. These are your placement tests. We need to see where you are academically so we can create a plan. But Emma, she met Emma's eyes. I reviewed your records from 6th grade. You were an excellent student. I don't think you've forgotten how to learn. I think you just haven't had the chance. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She'd been so afraid that coming back to school would mean being behind, being judged, being the poor kid who couldn't keep up. What if I can't catch up? Then we'll help you catch up. That's what we're here for. Mrs. Brennan smiled. But between you and me, I think you're going to surprise yourself. She did. By the end of the first month, Emma had caught up in most subjects. Math was hard, she'd missed crucial lessons, but the tutoring helped. English and history came back quickly. Muscle memory from the girl who'd loved reading and learning before life got in the way. Her teachers were patient and supportive, and her classmates, after the initial excitement wore off, treated her like any other student. Linda was keeping her promise too. She'd started therapy twice a week, paid for by a grant Mason had quietly arranged through his nonprofit organization that definitely existed and definitely wasn't just him personally funding everything. The therapist prescribed medication for Linda's depression. It took a few weeks to find the right combination, but slowly Linda began to emerge from the fog she'd been lost in. She got a job at a local diner, nothing glamorous but steady work with decent tips. She started cooking dinner again, started smiling, started being present in a way she hadn't been since Lily died. The apartment was cleaner. The bills got paid. It wasn't perfect or easy, but it was functional. And every week without fail, Mason and Lena visited. At first, Linda had been uncomfortable with it, worried about what people would think about bikers coming to their apartment. But Mason was respectful and kind, and Lena was impossible not to love. She'd bring drawings she'd made for Emma, pictures of the two of them as stick-figure sisters holding hands. She'd show Emma the new signs she'd learned patient with Emma's clumsy attempts to sign back. Emma started taking sign language classes, free lessons offered by the community center, another resource mysteriously well-funded by anonymous donors. She wasn't fluent yet, but she could have simple conversations with Lena now. And Lena's face would light up every time Emma managed a full sentence in ASL. One Saturday afternoon in late spring, Emma and Lena sat on the courthouse steps, the same steps where Emma had given her testimony 3 months ago. They came here sometimes, this place that marked the turning point, and ate ice cream and watched people pass behind. Lena signed something, fingers moving quickly. Emma had to ask her to repeat it slower. Lena did, patient as always. You happy now? Emma translated it aloud, confirming she'd understood correctly. Lena nodded enthusiastically, pointing at Emma for emphasis. You happy? Emma thought about it. Was she happy? Her life was still hard in a lot of ways. She and Linda were still poor. The apartment was still small and old. She still worried about money and bills and whether this fragile stability would hold. But she was in school. Her mother was healing. She had a friend, Noah's sister, in Lena. She had Mason's protection and Linda's presence, and the knowledge that she'd saved a life when it mattered most. Yeah, Emma said, signing and speaking simultaneously. I'm happy. Lena clapped her hands, delighted. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, pressing it into Emma's palm. Emma looked down to see another keychain angel identical to the one Lena had given her 3 months ago. Another one? Emma asked, confused. Lena signed something elaborate that Emma struggled to follow. She got the gist, though, 2 angels. One for you, one for me. So we're always together. Emma's eyes burned with tears. She pulled Lena into a hug, this little girl who'd accidentally given her back her life. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she understood the emotion. She hugged Emma back tightly, and they stayed like that for a long moment, 2 sisters bound not by blood, but by the strange alchemy of tragedy and salvation. When they finally pulled apart, Emma clipped one angel keychain to her backpack and handed the other back to Lena to keep. Lena attached it to her jacket zipper, immediately wearing it like a badge of honor. A familiar motorcycle rumble approached. Emma looked up to see Mason parking at the curb. He climbed off, pulling off his helmet, and walked over to them. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Your mom's expecting us for dinner." Emma nodded, standing and helping Lena to her feet. The three of them walked to the motorcycle together, this strange found family that shouldn't work but somehow did. Mason helped Lena with her helmet, then Emma with hers, patient and careful. As they rode through Bolar toward the Parkview apartments, Emma watched the town blur past. It looked different now. Not better exactly. The poverty and struggle were still evident in every boarded window and shuttered storefront. But Emma saw it differently. She saw the people trying, the families struggling, the quiet dignity in surviving. She saw herself in them. And she understood now that survival was its own kind of bravery. They pulled into the parking lot. Emma climbed off the bike legs, steady, no longer nervous about being seen with bikers. Linda was waiting at the apartment door, smiling, waving them up. She'd made spaghetti, nothing fancy, but made with love and attention. They ate together, all four of them, crowded around the small kitchen table. Mason told stories about his rides. Linda talked about her day at the diner. Lena drew pictures with the colored pencils Emma had bought her. And Emma sat in the middle of it all, feeling the warmth of belonging settle around her like a blanket. After dinner, while Linda and Mason did dishes and talked quietly in the kitchen, Emma and Lena sat on the couch. Lena pulled out a photo album. She'd brought pictures of her and her mother, Anna, before the cancer, before everything changed. She showed Emma each photo, carefully signing explanations. Emma pulled out her own phone and showed Lena pictures of Lily, the first time she'd been able to look at them without feeling crushing guilt. "My little sister Emma," signed carefully. "She died, but she taught me to be brave." Lena studied the photos, then looked at Emma with ancient wisdom in her young eyes. She signed something Emma didn't know. Mason, overhearing, translated from the kitchen. "She says Lily would be proud of you." Emma's vision blurred with tears. "You think so?" Lena nodded firmly, signing more. Mason's voice was gentle. "She says Lily sent her to you, so you could save someone this time." Emma didn't believe in ghosts or fate or divine intervention, but in that moment she wanted to. She wanted to believe that Lily's death had meaning, that it led somehow to Lena's life being saved, that the universe bent toward justice in small, strange ways. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But Emma had Lena here alive and safe, and that was enough. A year after the train tracks, Emma Hartley stood at the podium in Bolar High School auditorium, having skipped a grade thanks to her accelerated catch-up work and her natural academic talent, finally having room to flourish. She was 14, about to be 15, and she'd been asked to speak at the freshman orientation about resilience and community support. She'd almost said no. Public speaking terrified her. But Linda had encouraged her, and Mason had reminded her that her story could help other kids who felt invisible, and Lena had simply looked at her with those huge, trusting eyes, and Emma couldn't refuse. Now she stood in front of 200 students and parents, hands shaking, notes trembling in her grip. She looked out at the audience and found Linda in the third row, beaming with pride. Mason and Lena sat beside her, Mason having become such a fixture in their lives that nobody questioned his presence anymore. Officer Talon sat in the back, having become an advocate for at-risk youth after his suspension was lifted, and he was reassigned to community outreach. Even Deputy Chief Morrison was there, representing the police department's commitment to change. Dale Haskins had been arrested 2 weeks after the courthouse testimony. The tracker he'd planted, the reports he'd filed for payment from Decker, the surveillance photos he'd taken of residents, all of it constituted illegal activity. He was awaiting trial on multiple charges, including stalking, invasion of privacy, and conspiracy. The other residents of Parkview Apartments had thrown a small, quiet celebration when he was led away in handcuffs. Emma took a breath and began. 2 years ago, I dropped out of school to wash cars for $5 a pop because my family needed money. I was invisible. I was poor. I was ashamed. And I was sure that my life would never be more than survival. She paused, gathering courage. Then I saved a little girl from a train. And that single act of courage, one moment, where I chose to do the right thing even though I was scared, changed everything. It brought people into my life who cared. It forced systems to see me. It gave me back my future. Emma looked at Lena, who was watching her lips with intense concentration. But here's what I learned. I didn't save just one person that day. I saved myself too. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible. Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help. Sometimes the bravest thing is believing you deserve a future, even when everything tells you that you don't. Her voice grew stronger. If you're struggling, if you're poor, if your family's broken, if you feel like you don't matter, you do. You matter so much. And there are people who will help you if you let them. It won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me, but it's possible. Your story isn't over. Mine almost was, but it isn't. And neither is yours. She folded her notes done with the prepared speech. The rest came from her heart. I used to think that being poor made me worthless. I thought struggling meant failing. But I learned that poverty doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do with the chances you get, how you treat people, whether you run toward danger when someone needs help or look away because it's easier. Emma met Mason's eyes across the room. He nodded once proud. I also learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when you need them, who protect you when you're vulnerable, who believe in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. She looked back at the audience, at all those young faces, some confident, some scared, all of them standing at the beginning of their own journeys. 2 years ago, I was washing cars at a gas station trying to be invisible. Today I'm here. I'm in school. I have people who love me. I have a future. And if I can get from there to here, if I can survive what I survived and come out stronger, then you can too. Whatever you're facing, whatever impossible thing is blocking your path, you can overcome it. You can ask for help. You can be brave. You can refuse to disappear. Emma's voice broke slightly on the last sentence, emotion overwhelming her. You can save someone. And in doing that, you might just save yourself. The auditorium erupted in applause. Emma stood at the podium, stunned by the sound, by the standing ovation, by the way people looked at her like she was someone worth listening to. Linda was crying. Mason was clapping with his hands raised high so she could see him. And Lena was signing frantically a message Emma had learned well over the past year. I love you, sister. I love you. Emma signed it back, tears running down her face. I love you too. Later that night, after the orientation ended and everyone had gone home, Emma sat on her bed with Lily's old honor roll certificate in her hands. She'd taken it out from under her mattress after getting her own certificate earlier that week, honor roll 9th grade, perfect attendance, academic excellence. She looked at both certificates side by side, one from before the tragedy, one from after. I did it, Lily, Emma whispered to the empty room. I didn't give up. I kept going. And I think I'm okay now. I think we're going to be okay. The room didn't answer. Lily was gone and had been gone for years, and no amount of wishing would bring her back. But Emma felt something shift anyway, like a burden she'd been carrying finally being set down. She'd failed to save Lily. That truth would always hurt. But she'd saved Lena. And in doing so, she'd learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing every single day to do better, to be braver, to show up for the people who needed you. Emma placed both certificates on her desk, side by side, visible, a reminder of who she'd been and who she'd become. Then she climbed into bed, pulled up the covers, and fell asleep with the 2 angel keychains hanging from her bedpost, catching the streetlight through her window and glinting like promises kept. In the apartment below, Linda sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, going over bills that were actually paid on time for once. She smiled to herself, tired but content. Her daughter was asleep. They had food in the fridge. The rent was paid. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was enough. Across town, Mason Cross sat in his garage with Lena asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. He looked at a photo of Anna, his late wife, and whispered, "We did good, didn't we? The kid's going to be all right." And in the frame, Anna's frozen smile seemed to agree. The town of Bolar slept its struggles and triumphs, hidden behind closed doors and drawn curtains. But on the courthouse steps, the place where Emma had fought for her truth, a small memorial had appeared. Someone, possibly Emma, possibly Mason, possibly any of the people whose lives had intersected that day, had placed a small stone angel on the steps with a plaque that read, "For the invisible ones, for the brave ones, for everyone who refuses to look away." The angel faced the train tracks in the Bretons, a silent guardian, watching over a crossing that would never again be quite as dangerous a town, that would never again be quite as blind, and a girl who would never again be invisible. Emma Hartley had saved a life, and in doing so, she'd reclaimed her own. The end. Final word count, 20,147 words.